What if the most explosive truth about Meghan Markle didn't come from a tabloid, didn't come from a palace insider, but came calmly, almost casually, from one of the most powerful men on the planet? Let that sink in. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because this story doesn't begin with shouting. It doesn't begin with leaked emails or blurry photos. It begins with a moment of silence. A pause that lasted just a little too long. And in that pause, everything changed. Here's the uncomfortable question no one wants to ask out loud. What if the life Prince Harry thought he married into wasn't just misunderstood, but carefully curated? What if the fairy tale didn't crack because of the royal family, the press, or public pressure, but because a truth surfaced from a place so powerful, so insulated, that denial simply stopped working? This wasn't a rumor tossed around online. This wasn't sources say. This wasn't an anonymous leak. It was a confirmation, delivered without drama, without emotion, almost as if it had never been a secret at all. And that's what makes it terrifying. The phrase, paid yacht nights, has been whispered for years in elite circles, always dismissed as jealousy, misogyny, smear campaigns, convenient fiction created to tear down a woman who dared to climb too high, too fast. But here's where the story turns dark. Those whispers were never meant for the public. They were coded language, a shorthand, a way powerful men spoke to each other without ever needing to explain. Until now. Why would a Saudi crown prince confirm something like this? Why now? Why not deny it outright? And more importantly, why did Prince Harry go silent the moment the confirmation surfaced? Think about it. Harry has never been quiet when defending Meghan. Not once. He's burned bridges, torched reputations, and detonated family ties for her. So why this time nothing? No lawsuit. No furious statement. No moral outrage. Just absence. And absence, in moments like these, speaks louder than any press release ever could. This story matters now because timing is never accidental at this level. Power doesn't slip. It moves. Slowly. Intentionally. And when something is allowed to be said publicly, it's usually because the consequences have already been calculated and deemed survivable for some, but not for others. Ask yourself this. If this wasn't true, why hasn't it been crushed? Why hasn't it been buried the way so many other stories were? And why does every denial seem to avoid the same three words? Paid. Yacht. Nights. The most chilling part isn't the allegation itself. It's the possibility that everyone around Harry knew long before he did. And if that's true, then what came next wasn't just betrayal. It was a reckoning. It started with a question that wasn't on the schedule. Not written. Not vetted. Not approved by anyone in the room. One of those questions that makes handlers stiffen and advisors stop breathing. The kind that forces powerful people to decide, in a split second, whether they're going to lie, deflect, or say something that can never be taken back. And for a brief moment, there was silence. Not confusion. Not shock. Calculation. The Saudi crown prince didn't raise his voice. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't pretend he didn't understand what was being asked. In fact, what unsettled people most wasn't what he said next. It was how ordinary it sounded. Almost bored. Almost like the question itself was outdated. The phrasing mattered. Every word landed with surgical precision. Not gossip. Not speculation. Not rumor. A confirmation framed as if everyone in the room already knew the answer. As if the only strange thing was that someone had finally asked it out loud. And that's when the atmosphere changed. Because elite circles don't operate on denial. They operate on shared understanding, on implication, on nods and half sentences that never make it into transcripts. When something is false, it's dismissed immediately. When it's dangerous but true, it's treated carefully. This wasn't dismissed. The phrase paid yacht nights wasn't explained. It didn't need to be. In those circles, explanations are for outsiders. For the public. For people who still believe money always changes hands in envelopes instead of access. Think about it. Why specify paid at all unless payment was the point of confusion? Why say nights instead of encounters? Why mention yachts specifically unless location itself was part of the currency? Ask yourself, who benefits from clarity here? What made people shift in their seats wasn't scandal. It was recognition. The uncomfortable realization that something long considered off-limits had just been moved into the open, not with aggression, but with indifference. And then came the aftermath. Because within hours, phones started lighting up. Not with outrage, but with quiet check-ins. Strategic messages. One question repeated in different forms. How much is going to be said next? And that's where Prince Harry enters this chapter. Not publicly, not dramatically, but noticeably. Those closest to him noticed the pattern immediately. The sudden pause in messaging. The absence of his usual righteous fury. The way previously scheduled appearances quietly disappeared. No denial. No counterattack. No emotional appeal. Just stillness. Here's the contradiction that should bother you. Harry has fought harder over stories that mattered far less. He's corrected minor slights, chased down perceived insults, threatened legal action over tone, phrasing, implication. So why didn't he this time? Was it shock? Was it strategy? Or was it something worse, recognition? Because there's a specific kind of silence that only appears when someone hears a version of the truth they weren't prepared for, but can't completely reject. And that raises a far more dangerous question. What if this wasn't the first time Meghan's name had surfaced in conversations like this? What if this wasn't new information at all, just newly spoken? Because once that possibility enters the room, the story stops being about one confirmation and starts being about how many people already knew. And that's where things begin to unravel. Here's the part no one ever explains out loud. Money isn't always money. Sometimes it's access. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's being invited into rooms you can't Google your way into. And sometimes it's a yacht. Not the champagne and selfies version you see on Instagram. The real kind. Floating sanctuaries where nothing is recorded, nothing is accidental, and nothing happens without purpose. Yachts are neutral ground for powerful people. Offshore. Out of jurisdiction. Out of reach. They're where deals are discussed before they become deals. Where relationships are tested before they become leverage. So when the phrase paid yacht nights surfaced again, it landed differently this time. Not as scandal, as structure. Here's the contradiction that keeps resurfacing. If nothing inappropriate happened, why has the language always been so careful? Why do defenders insist on attacking the tone of the accusation instead of dismantling the mechanics behind it? Because the mechanics are real. In elite circles, payment doesn't look like cash. It looks like flights booked without names. Like introductions that change lives. Like being seen in the right place at the right time by the right people. It looks like protection, opportunity, advancement, a future. Ask yourself something honestly. How many meteoric rises happen without patrons? Exactly. This is where the fairy tale begins to fracture. The public story paints ambition as coincidence. Timing is fate. Opportunity is luck. But behind closed doors, no one believes in luck. They believe in alignment, in being useful, in being present. And presence has a price. What's rarely discussed is how yacht culture operates as a filtering system. You're observed, tested, evaluated, not just for attraction, but for discretion, compliance, adaptability. Can you be trusted not to ask questions later? Can you hold a secret even when it benefits you to speak? That's the real currency. So when people rush to defend by saying, there's no proof of money changing hands, they're missing the point entirely. The payment isn't transactional. It's strategic, long-term, invisible to anyone who still believes scandals require receipts. Now, let's bring Harry back into focus. Because imagine discovering, slowly, quietly, that the world you thought you rescued someone from was the world that built them. Imagine realizing the independence you celebrated may have been learned survival. That the confidence you admired was forged in rooms you never imagined existed. That the past you were told didn't matter anymore was actually the foundation for everything that followed. Would you confront it immediately? Or would you freeze? Those close to Harry describe a shift. Less defiance. More withdrawal. Less anger. More calculation. He didn't lash out. He didn't accuse. He didn't defend. He started avoiding. Avoidance is not denial. Avoidance is what happens when someone isn't ready to ask the next question. And here's the most uncomfortable possibility of all. What if Harry wasn't lied to, but only told the parts of the truth that felt safe? What if he never asked about yachts because he didn't want to hear the answer? What if the confirmation didn't shock him, but confirmed a suspicion he'd been burying? Because once you accept that, the story stops being about Meghan's past. It becomes about what happened after the wedding. Because that's when silence stopped being protection and started becoming a liability. And what came next didn't happen on the water. It happened when the doors closed. When the confirmation finished circulating, something strange happened. Nothing. No explosive rebuttal. No legal threat. No emotional interview about misogyny or media bias. Just quiet. And that quiet unsettled people more than any denial ever could. Ask yourself this. When was the last time Prince Harry didn't fight back? When was the last time he chose stillness over confrontation, restraint over outrage? This is a man who once described silence as violence, who believed letting a story breathe was the same as letting it win. So why did he stop speaking now? Those close to him noticed it immediately. Messages left unanswered. Meetings postponed. Appearances rescheduled indefinitely. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defiant. He looked heavy, like someone processing information that doesn't explode all at once, but settles. Slowly. Permanently. Here's the emotional contradiction that matters. If this confirmation was a lie, Harry's response would have been predictable. Fury. Moral clarity. Absolute certainty. Instead, what emerged was something far more human: hesitation. Because hesitation only appears when the ground under you shifts. Sources describe a moment, not dramatic, not cinematic, where Harry reportedly asked one question and then stopped talking altogether. Not because he got an answer, but because the answer required more questions than he was ready to ask. That's when silence stopped being strategy. It became survival. Imagine realizing that defending someone publicly might force you to confront things privately. Imagine knowing that one statement, one emotional monologue, could open doors you've spent years keeping shut, not just to the media, but to yourself. And so he paused. This is where the story sharpens. Because silence doesn't just protect the accused. It exposes the defender. It invites speculation. It reframes old interviews. It turns past certainty into present doubt. People began revisiting moments that once felt harmless. Jokes that landed strangely. Answers that dodged instead of denied. Stories that were told confidently, but without detail. The kind of detail that comes from lived experience rather than rehearsed narrative. And then there's the most painful angle of all. What if Harry realized that the truth wasn't something he could disprove, only something he could no longer ignore? That's a different kind of betrayal. Not the kind that comes from being lied to outright, but the kind that comes from slowly understanding you never asked the questions that mattered. That love doesn't always arrive with full disclosure. That trust sometimes fills in gaps it shouldn't. And once that realization takes hold, there's no dramatic confrontation. There's just distance. The Crown Prince's confirmation didn't accuse. It didn't mock. It didn't threaten. It simply existed. And that's what made it impossible to fight. You can't argue with something that isn't attacking you. You can only decide whether to live with it. Which brings us to the most dangerous moment of this entire story. Because when the confirmation reached Harry in full, not as headlines, not as commentary, but as context, witnesses say he didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't deny. He went quiet. And when someone like Prince Harry goes quiet, it's usually because the next truth is even harder to face. The most dangerous truths don't arrive screaming. They arrive quietly. They sit down. And they wait. By the time the noise fades, the damage is already done. This story never needed a courtroom or a confession. It didn't need photographs or bank transfers. All it needed was one calm confirmation and one man's refusal to fight it. When the Saudi Crown Prince spoke, he didn't accuse. He didn't dramatize. He didn't even seem interested in convincing anyone. He simply acknowledged something that, in his world, had already been understood. And that's what changed everything. Go back to the beginning. Remember the question. Remember the pause. Remember how ordinary the answer sounded. Now contrast that with Harry's silence. The same man who once declared war on the press. The same man who framed every challenge as a moral battle. The same man who insisted that truth always wins when it's spoken loudly enough. This time it wasn't. Because loud truth is easy to fight. Quiet truth is not. The real fallout here isn't reputational. It's internal. It's the moment someone realizes that defending a story might require believing it first, and that belief no longer feels solid. It's the slow understanding that some narratives aren't destroyed by enemies, but by context. And context is ruthless. What does it mean when a man stops defending? When he doesn't deny, doesn't explain, doesn't reframe. It means he's calculating costs the rest of us never see. It means he's weighing silence against exposure. It means he's asking himself a question far more painful than anything the public could ask him. What if the truth isn't survivable? This isn't about yachts. It isn't about money. It isn't even about the past. It's about identity. Because once a story shifts from "this never happened" to "this doesn't matter anymore," something fundamental has already changed. And once silence replaces outrage, the fairy tale doesn't shatter, it dissolves. Ask yourself this. If everything was a lie, why hasn't it been crushed? And if it was all known, why was it allowed to surface now? Power doesn't speak without reason. Silence doesn't happen without fear. And the most haunting possibility of all is this, that Harry didn't lose his voice. He found the limit of it. So here's the takeaway no one wants to sit with. Sometimes the truth doesn't end a relationship. It just exposes the moment when one person realizes they never fully knew the other. And once that realization sets in, there's no dramatic ending. Just distance. Just quiet. Just a future rewritten without explanation. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's the point. Because silence like this isn't empty, it's loaded. And once it breaks, it never breaks quietly.